It was several seconds before he was able to say calmly, "And do you think that's better than what I can give her?" "It's lousy, it stinks, but yes, it's better than turning into something that hunts people, that uses people. That's why all the girlfriends, isn't it?" Once again, James couldn't answer right away. Phil's problem, he was realizing, was that Phil was far too smart for his own good. He thought too much. "Yeah, that's why all the girlfriends," he said at last, tiredly, trying not to see this from Phil's point of view. "Just tell me one thing, Rasmussen." Philip straightened and looked him dead in the eye. "Did you—" He stopped and swallowed. "Feed on Poppy before she got sick?" "No." Phil let out his breath. "That's good, because if you had, I'd have killed you." James believed him. He was much stronger than Phil, much faster, and he'd never been afraid of a human before. But just at that moment, he had no doubt that Phil would somehow have found a way to do it. "Look, there's something you don't understand," he said. "Poppy did want this, and it's something we've already started. She's only just beginning to change. If she dies now, she won't become a vampire, but she might not die all the way, either. She could end up a walking corpse. A zombie, you know? Mindless, body rotting, but immortal." Phil's mouth quivered with revulsion. "You're just saying that to scare me." James looked away. "I've seen it happen." "I don't believe you." "I've seen it firsthand." Dimly, James realized he was yelling and that he'd grabbed Phil by the shirt front. He was out of control, and he didn't care. "I've seen it happen to somebody I cared about, all right?" And then, because Phil was still shaking his head, "I was only 4 years old and I had a nanny. All the rich kids in San Francisco have nannies. She was human." "Let go," Phil muttered, pulling at James's wrist. He was breathing hard. He didn't want to hear this. "I was crazy about her. She gave me everything my mum didn't. Love, attention. She was never too busy. I called her Miss Emma." "Let go." "But my parents thought I was too attached to her, so they took me on a little vacation, and they didn't let me feed. Not for 3 days. By the time they brought me back, I was starving. Then they sent Miss Emma up to put me to bed." Phil had stopped fighting now. He stood with his head bowed and turned to one side so he wouldn't have to look at James. James threw his words at the averted face. "I was only 4. I couldn't stop myself. And the thing is, I wanted to. If you'd asked me who I'd rather die, me or Miss Emma, I'd have said me. But when you're starving, you lose control. So I fed on her. And all the time I was crying and trying to stop. And when I could finally stop, I knew it was too late." There was a pause. James suddenly realized that his fingers were locked in an agonizing cramp. He let go of Phil's shirt slowly. Phil said nothing. She was just lying there on the floor. I thought, wait, if I give her my own blood, she'll be a vampire and everything will be okay. He wasn't yelling anymore. He wasn't even really speaking to Philip, but staring out into the dark parking lot. So I cut myself and let the blood run into her mouth. She swallowed some of it before my parents came up and stopped me, but not enough. A longer pause, and James remembered why he was telling the story. He looked at Philip. She died that night, but not all the way. The 2 different kinds of blood were fighting inside her. So by morning she was walking around again, but she wasn't Miss Emma anymore. She drooled and her skin was grey and her eyes were flat like a corpse's, and when she started to rot, my dad took her out to Inverness and buried her. He killed her first. Bile rose in James's throat, and he added almost in a whisper, "I hope he killed her first." Phil slowly turned around to look at him. For the first time that evening, there was something other than horror and fear in his face. something like pity, James thought. James took a deep breath. After 13 years of science, he'd finally told the story, to Philip North of all people. But it was no good wondering about the absurdity. He had a point to drive home. So take my advice. If you don't convince Poppy to see me, make sure they don't do an autopsy on her. You don't want her walking around without her internal organs. And have a wooden stake ready for the time when you can't stand to look at her anymore. The pity was gone from Phil's eyes. His mouth was a hard, trembling line. We won't let her turn into some kind of half-alive abomination, he said. Or a vampire either. I'm sorry about what happened to your Miss Emma, but it doesn't change anything. Poppy should be the one to decide, but Philip had reached his limit, and now he was simply shaking his head. Just keep away from my sister, he said. That's all I want. If you do, I'll leave you alone. And if you don't, what? I'm going to tell everybody in El Camino what you are. I'm going to call the police and the mayor, and I'm going to stand in the middle of the street and yell it. James felt his hands go icy cold. What Phil didn't realise was that he'd just made it James's duty to kill him. It wasn't just that any human who stumbled upon Night World secrets had to die, but that one actively threatening to tell about the Night World had to die immediately. No questions asked, no mercy given. Suddenly James was so tired he couldn't see straight. Get out of here, Phil, he said, in a voice drained of emotion and vitality both. Now, and if you really want to protect Poppy, you won't tell anybody anything, because they'll trace it back and find out that Poppy knows the secrets too. And then they'll kill her, after bringing her in for questioning. It won't be fun. Who are they? Your parents? The night people. We're all around you, Phil. Anybody you know could be one, including the mayor. So keep your mouth shut. Philip looked at him through narrowed eyes. Then he turned and walked to the front of the store. James couldn't remember when he'd felt so empty. Everything he'd done had turned out wrong. Poppy was now in more kinds of danger than he could count, and Philip North thought he was unnatural and evil. What Phil didn't know was that most of the time, James thought the same thing. Philip got halfway home before he remembered that he'd dropped the bag with Poppy's cranberry juice and wild cherry popsicles. Poppy had hardly eaten in the last 2 days, and when she did get hungry, it was for something weird. No, something red, he realised as he paid for a second time at the 7-Eleven. He felt a sick lurch in his stomach. Everything she wanted lately was red, and at least semi-liquid. Did Poppy realise that herself? He studied her when he went into her bedroom to give her a popsicle. Poppy spent most of the time in bed now. And she was so pale and still. Her green eyes were the only alive thing about her. They dominated her face, glittering with an almost savage awareness. Cliff and Phil's mother were talking about getting round-the-clock nurses to be with her. Don't like the popsicle? Phil asked, dragging a chair to sit beside her bed. Poppy was eyeing the thing with distaste. She took a tiny lick and grimaced. Philip watched her. Another lick. Then she put the popsicle into an empty plastic cup on her nightstand. I don't know. I just don't feel hungry, she said, leaning back against the pillows. Sorry I had to go out for nothing. No problem. God, she looks sick, Phil thought. Is there anything else I can do for you?